Men are relaxing and playing video games while watching society collapse from a distance. Millions of men have walked away from society, and women are now confronting a reality they never expected after years of pushing for that very separation. Think about what unfolds when half the population quietly opts out of the traditional roles they once filled without fanfare or confrontation, and instead chooses simplicity and self reliance, while the broader structures of daily life begin to strain under economic pressures that no one can ignore any longer. This is the sobering shift happening right now across the Western world, where men have listened to the long standing calls for them to step back, and they have done exactly that, finding peace in their own space rather than continuing in cycles that offered little in return. And if you stay with this discussion all the way through, you will see the full scope of how this movement is reshaping everything from personal finances to community stability in ways that will only intensify as costs continue to climb and support systems falter, leaving a clear picture of the future that awaits if nothing changes. And if you're enjoying these Angry Guy videos, you can show your support by buying me a Red Bull with a one-time gift or via a monthly pledge by using the link in the description of the video. Men across the country have been listening to the messages directed at them for decades, and they have responded in the only way that makes sense by stepping back entirely from the expectations that once defined their place in relationships and society, choosing instead to focus on their own well being through simple routines like resting, playing video games, and enjoying the solitude that brings a genuine sense of calm after years of being pulled in multiple directions. This choice did not come from sudden anger, but from a steady accumulation of experiences where efforts went unreciprocated and the benefits flowed only one way, leading men to prioritize their survival and mental clarity over continuing to prop up dynamics that left them drained and undervalued. While this shift has been gradual, it has now reached a point where it is noticeable in everyday life as fewer men pursue the old patterns of dating and providing without question, and instead they invest their time and resources in ways that serve them directly in an era when inflation is driving up the price of food and housing at rates that make basic stability harder for everyone. The result is that women who once relied on male support for everything from covering expenses to handling practical tasks are finding themselves in increasingly difficult positions without that buffer. And this is not a matter of blame, but a straightforward observation of how the system works. When one group withdraws, the other feels the immediate impact, especially in a time when government programs that once offered assistance to single mothers and others are being scaled back with new rules requiring work education or training that many were not prepared to navigate after depending on different arrangements for so long. The cost of living crisis is hitting hard, with rents climbing faster than incomes in major cities and food costs adding pressure to household budgets that already stretch thin without additional help from partners or friends who have chosen to step away entirely. Men have found peace in this solitude because it allows them to avoid the exhaustion of one sided interactions where their role was often reduced to being a source of financial or emotional support without equivalent returns. And this realization has spread widely as more men see the pattern clearly and decide that their own peace is worth more than chasing connections that consistently leave them feeling used and unfulfilled. Women, on the other hand, are experiencing the full weight of these changes as they face rising expenses with fewer options for relief. And this desperation is showing up in public expressions of frustration directed at the men who have walked away, which only highlights how much the previous setup depended on male involvement that is no longer there. The irony is thick because the calls for men to change and give space were heeded completely, yet the outcome is leaving many women without the resources or networks they assumed would always be available. And as economic conditions worsen, with inflation eating into savings and job markets shifting in unpredictable ways, the absence of that traditional support becomes even more pronounced, leading to situations where women are struggling to cover basics like housing and daily needs without the contributions that once came from boyfriends or male friends who have now opted out entirely. This is a wake up call to how interconnected these roles truly were, and how removing one part creates ripple effects that cannot be ignored or wished away through further demands. The men who have made this choice are not hiding or arguing. They are simply living their lives in ways that feel sustainable, focusing on rest and activities that recharge them rather than depleting their energy on relationships that offered little balance. And this approach has brought a level of contentment that was missing before, when the pressure to perform and provide was constant now, with the dating scene slowing down because men have grown wise to patterns where invitations often led to expectations of payment or assistance without mutual benefit. The landscape has changed dramatically, and women are left to navigate it alone in ways that expose the vulnerabilities of going without the protection and partnership that nature and history showed was essential for long term stability. Governments that once stepped in with welfare promises are facing their own limitations as budgets tighten and programs get cut or reformed, requiring participants to meet new criteria that many single mothers find challenging. After years of different circumstances, this leaves a growing number of women in precarious spots with no clear path forward, and the frustration builds as they see the men they once counted on living peacefully without engaging in the old cycles. The truth is that men realized over time that many interactions were unbalanced, with female friendships and dating often centered on what they could offer in terms of time, money, or emotional labor, while giving little back in return. And once that pattern became clear, the decision to walk away was logical and final, not out of spite, but out of self preservation, in a world where survival requires careful management of limited resources, especially as costs rise and opportunities for easy relief disappear. This movement has gained momentum because it aligns with the realities men face daily, from high living expenses to the mental toll of constant demands that never seem to ease. And by choosing solitude, they have reclaimed a sense of control that feels authentic and sustainable, while society at large continues to grapple with the fallout. From these choices, the economic pressures are not letting up, with food prices climbing steadily, rents in urban areas outpacing wage growth and overall inflation, creating a squeeze that affects daily decisions for everyone involved. Women who built their expectations around having access to male support for practical matters like repairs, transportation, or financial help during tough times are now confronting the gap left behind. And this is leading to louder expressions of discontent as the reality sets in that the independence they championed comes with costs they did not fully anticipate when the support systems they relied on begin to fade. The strain becomes undeniable, and the blame often turns toward the men who have simply listened and stepped aside rather than continuing to absorb the pressure. This is not a temporary phase, but a fundamental realignment where men have found value in their own company and routines that do not involve the exhaustion of trying to meet expectations that were never matched with equivalent effort from the other side. The result is a society where the absence of male engagement is felt more acutely in areas like emotional support, practical assistance, and financial sharing, and women are left to manage these challenges independently in an environment where the government gravy train that was promised as a replacement is slowing down, with cuts to social programs and new requirements that demand more self sufficiency than many were prepared for. After relying on different arrangements, this creates a cycle of increasing difficulty where rising costs compound the lack of support networks, and the frustration mounts as the men who once filled those roles remain content in their withdrawal focusing on peace and personal activities rather than re entering the fray. This dynamic reveals deep truths about human interdependence and how decades of messaging that encourage separation has led to outcomes that few truly foresaw when men prioritize their own survival over continuing in unbalanced dynamics. The entire picture shifts and the consequences become clear for those who are now facing the world without the buffer that was once taken for granted. The economic meltdown that is building will test these changes even further as inflation and cost pressures intensify beyond what previous generations experienced. And without the traditional safety nets of family partners or community involvement, the impact will land hardest on those who advocated most strongly for independence without considering the full implications. This is the sobering part that cannot be avoided because the data from marriage rates dropping sharply over recent decades and more people remaining single shows the trend is real and accelerating. Men have adapted by finding fulfillment in simpler paths, while women are discovering the limits of navigating these pressures alone. And the lashing out that follows is a natural response to the discomfort of realizing that the calls for men to go away were taken literally with lasting effects that no amount of shaming can reverse. The men involved are not returning to the old ways because they have seen the one sided nature of many interactions where attention and resources flowed outward without coming back in meaningful forms. And this awareness has spread widely, leading to a collective choice for solitude that brings genuine relief after years of feeling like emotional or financial resources were being tapped without reciprocity, as the cost of living crisis deepens with higher prices for essentials and housing becoming less affordable. The absence of that support becomes a daily reality for many women who are now dealing with situations ranging from stretched budgets to more severe instability, and this is compounded by the fact that government assistance is not expanding, but contracting in many areas, requiring greater personal effort at a time when the broader economy is showing signs of strain that will only grow. The quiet nature of the men's withdrawal makes it even more effective because there is no debate or negotiation to pull them back in. They have simply moved on to lives that serve them better, and the peace they have found in video games, rest, and personal hobbies stands in contrast to the growing urgency felt elsewhere. This contrast highlights the raw truth of the situation where one group has adapted successfully to the messages of the past, while the other is left to confront the practical outcomes of those same messages in an unforgiving economic climate. The desperation that emerges is understandable, but it does not change the fact that men have made their choice based on clear observations of how things worked, and they are not inclined to reverse course when the benefits of staying out outweigh the costs of re engaging. The broader societal collapse that is unfolding slowly is tied directly to these shifts as resources become scarcer, and the lack of balanced partnerships leaves gaps that cannot be filled by policy alone. Women who once believed that male desire for companionship or family would always keep the dynamic alive are now seeing that survival instincts take precedence when the risks and expenses outweigh the rewards. And this realization is hitting at a time when financial stability is harder to achieve without shared responsibilities. The men who have walked away are not looking back because the patterns they left behind involved too much giving and too little receiving, leaving them exhausted and undervalued in ways that solitude has healed. This is the core of the movement, and it explains why it continues to grow. Even as external pressures mount, the women facing these challenges are responding with increased frustration, directed at the very group that has disengaged. And this only reinforces the wisdom of the choice for those who have already stepped aside, because engaging would mean returning to the same unbalanced cycles that drove the withdrawal in the first place. As inflation continues to erode purchasing power and housing costs, push more people toward instability. The divide becomes clearer with men maintaining their peace through simple living, while others struggle without the support structures that were once central. The government being limited in its ability to fill those gaps only adds to the pressure, and the coming economic difficulties promise to be more severe than anything seen in modern times, leaving those without strong personal networks in particularly vulnerable positions. This is not speculation, but a logical extension of current trends where costs rise faster than solutions, and the independence that was celebrated now reveals its practical limits. The men who have chosen this path have done so after careful consideration of the facts around them, including the one sided nature of many relationships and the constant demands that never seem to balance out. They have found that keeping their resources and energy for themselves allows for a level of stability and calm that was missing before. And this choice has proven resilient. Even as society changes around them, the fury from women stems from the sudden absence of options that were previously available through male involvement, whether it was free assistance with tasks, financial help during tough times, or emotional availability. And without those, the reality of self reliance hits hard, especially in a cost of living environment that punishes isolation. The historical context of movements that targeted men with broad accusations and calls for behavioral change set the stage for this outcome. Because when men heard those messages and took them to heart, the result was a complete disengagement that left no room for partial returns. The simps who once tried to maintain the old dynamics have also faded as they too recognize the futility. And now the landscape is one where men prioritize their own survival and peace over attempting to rescue or provide for those who push them away. This is the straightforward truth of the moment, and it serves as a wake up call for anyone observing the shifts because the economic realities will not wait for reconciliation or change. In attitudes, the women who are now in positions of financial strain from rising rents, food costs, and reduced access to support are experiencing the full impact of decisions made over decades, and the blame directed outward does not alter the fact that the men have moved on to lives of quiet contentment. The impending meltdown in the broader economy will amplify these issues, making the lack of traditional safety nets even more apparent as programs shrink and requirements increase, leaving many without the fallback they assumed would always exist. This creates a situation where the harshness of reality becomes unavoidable, and men who have already adapted by walking away are positioned to weather it better. Through their focus on self reliance and low demand, living the irony of women feeling betrayed after advocating for separation is not lost on observers. But the men involved are not engaging with that narrative because they have learned that debates based on feelings rather than facts lead nowhere. Productive and exhaustion is the only outcome, so they remain in their chosen solitude, playing video games, resting, and enjoying the peace that comes from no longer being the default provider or emotional support. This approach has allowed them to avoid the drain of relationships that were often about women receiving benefits without offering equivalent value. And the clarity that comes from this distance is empowering in its simplicity. As the cost of living crisis sweeps across regions with higher prices for everything from groceries to shelter, the divide in experiences becomes stark, with men maintaining stability through careful choices, while women face mounting pressures without the previous buffers the government cuts to social programs. Add another layer of difficulty requiring more individual effort at a time when many are already stretched thin. And this combination is driving the desperation that manifests in public, lashing out at men who have simply listened and acted on the messages of the past. The raw truth is that nature designed humans for interdependence. And when that is disrupted by social engineering and economic strain, The consequences play out in predictable ways, with those who opt out of the old roles finding peace, while those left behind confront the gaps. This is the sobering reality unfolding now, and it will only become more evident as inflation and housing challenges persist without easy solutions. The men who have walked away are not returning because the peace they have found in their routines is genuine and sustainable, avoiding the pitfalls of one sided dynamics that left them feeling like resources to be tapped rather than partners in balance. This choice reflects a deep understanding of the world as it is rather than as it was promised, and it positions them well for the uncertainties ahead. While the frustration from women grows louder, the men remain unaffected, continuing their path of self focus and contentment. The broader societal changes, including declining marriage rates and increasing singlehood, show that this is not an isolated trend, but a widespread adaptation to the conditions created over time. And as the economic pressures build toward a potential downturn worse than previous ones, the lack of strong support networks will be felt most by those who relied on external systems that are now faltering. This is the wake up call that cannot be ignored because the decisions made in the coming years will determine how individuals navigate the shifts. And men who have already chosen peace are demonstrating a model of resilience through simplicity and withdrawal from unbalanced expectations. The women who are now dealing with the fallout from these changes are in a position where blaming the men who listened does little to address the practical needs of covering costs and managing without the help that was once available through boyfriends, male friends, or family. Structures that have been distanced, the government being unable to fully compensate, only heightens the urgency, and the cycle continues as costs rise and options narrow. This is the straightforward state of affairs, and it demands a clear eyed look at how we arrived here through years of messaging that encouraged men to step aside and women to pursue independence without fully accounting for the economic and social realities that would follow. The men have adapted by embracing solitude and personal activities that bring fulfillment without the drain of constant giving. And this has proven to be a wise move as the world changes around them. The desperation that follows is a natural human response to unmet needs, but it does not change the fact that the withdrawal was complete and based on clear observations of how the dynamics operated. The coming economic challenges will test everyone, but those who have built lives of low reliance on others will likely fare better, maintaining their peace while others scramble for solutions that are no longer readily available. This is the core truth of the moment, and it serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of self reliance in uncertain times. The patterns of the past, where men served as default providers for meals, rides, repairs, and emotional support, have been broken, and the void left behind is now being felt acutely as women navigate higher costs and reduced assistance. The men who walked away did so quietly, without drama, realizing that arguments based on feelings rather than mutual facts lead only to further exhaustion. And so they chose the path of least resistance, which turned out to be the most rewarding, focusing on their own survival and enjoyment in ways that do not involve re entering the old cycles. This decision has spread because it makes sense in the current climate where resources are limited and the rewards of engagement are unclear. The economic crisis, with its inflation on essentials and housing shortages, is exposing the vulnerabilities of solo living. For those who once depended on shared responsibilities and the government reductions in support, add to the strain, creating a situation where many women are facing poverty risks that were not part of the original vision of independence. This is not about judgment, but about observing the outcomes of choices made over time. And the men who have opted out are living proof that peace can be found in simplicity when the alternative is continued imbalance. The frustration from women is understandable given the sudden shift, but the men are not swayed because they have experienced the one sided nature of many interactions and prefer the clarity of solitude. The broader picture includes a dating economy that has slowed because men have become informed about patterns of use for free meals or attention without reciprocity. And this awareness has led to a collective stepping back that leaves women without the previous options for easy support. This change is accelerating as economic conditions worsen and the need for mutual benefit becomes more apparent, yet the men remain committed to their path of self focus and the peace it brings. The impending larger meltdown in the economy will make these dynamics even more pronounced as safety nets shrink and costs climb, leaving those without strong personal connections in the most difficult positions. The irony of the situation is that the very movements that called for men to change and give space have resulted in men doing exactly that with complete finality. And now the consequences are playing out in real time as women confront the harshness of reality without the protection or assistance they once had. This is the sobering wake up call that the world is facing, and it will require honest reflection on how interdependence was undervalued in favor of separation that has proven unsustainable for many. The men who have chosen this way of life are not suffering, but thriving in their routines of rest and personal activities while the pressures mount elsewhere. And this contrast will only grow as the cost of living crisis deepens and government programs continue to adjust downward. The raw truth is that human society functions best with balance. And when that balance is disrupted by one group, withdrawing, the effects are felt across the board. Yet the men have found their equilibrium in solitude, and they are not inclined to abandon it for the sake of returning to dynamics that left them drained and unappreciated. This is the authoritative reality of the times, and it calls for clear thinking about the future. As economic challenges intensify and the choices of the past come to full fruition, the women who are lashing out in response are reacting to the loss of options that were built into the previous system. And without those, the struggle for stability becomes more immediate and difficult, especially with rising expenses and fewer avenues for relief. The men have moved on because they saw the patterns of gaslighting and unbalanced expectations and decided that their own survival and peace were more important than continuing to play roles that offered little reward. This decision has been validated by the contentment they experience daily, and it stands as a model for navigating uncertain times. The broader societal collapse that is unfolding is tied to these personal choices multiplied across millions. And the result is a world where the absence of male engagement is reshaping everything from relationships to economic flows. Women who believed that men would always pursue them for companionship or family are now seeing that practical survival takes priority when the costs are high and the benefits uncertain. And the shift is permanent because the men have learned from the past and chosen a different path. The government, being limited in its capacity to replace the lost support, only adds to the pressure, and the coming difficulties promise to be significant, testing the resilience of those who are now without the traditional networks. This is the straightforward truth that cannot be escaped, and it serves as a powerful call to examine the foundations of how we live and relate in the modern era. The peace that men have found in their solitude is real, and it comes from avoiding the exhaustion of one sided interactions that were common in the old dynamics. They have embraced activities that recharge them and resources that stay with them, allowing for a level of stability that feels authentic in a time of widespread uncertainty. The desperation from women is growing as they face the full impact of these changes without the buffers that once existed, and the blame directed at men does little to resolve the practical issues of covering costs and managing alone. The economic conditions, with their inflation and housing pressures, are unforgiving, and the lack of male involvement makes the situation more challenging for those who relied on it previously. This is the raw state of affairs, and it demands attention from anyone concerned with the direction of society as the trends continue. And the meltdown approaches of the dividing experiences will become even more evident, with men maintaining their calm through self reliance while others navigate increasing difficulties. The men who walked away did so after seeing the futility of debates that never led to mutual understanding, and they have no interest in returning to that cycle, preferring the clarity and peace of their current lives. This choice reflects a deep wisdom about the world as it is, and it has proven effective in preserving their well being. Amid the changes, the women who are now in positions of strain are discovering the limits of the independence that was promoted, and the reality of needing support in practical matters is hitting hard. As costs rise and options narrow, the government reductions in aid only heighten the urgency, and the cycle of frustration builds as the men remain disengaged and content in their routines. This is the sobering picture that is unfolding, and it will continue to develop as the economic pressures mount and the consequences of past messages play out fully. The truth is that men have prioritized their own survival and peace because the alternative was continued depletion without reward. And this decision has brought them a level of fulfillment that was missing before. The broader implications for society are significant, as the withdrawal affects everything from daily interactions to long term stability, and women are left to confront these changes without the previous safety nets. The impending economic challenges will make the situation even more critical as resources become scarcer and the need for self reliance becomes paramount. This is the authoritative reality of the moment, and it calls for honest acknowledgement of how we arrived here through decades of social shifts that encourage separation. Without fully considering the practical outcomes, the men who have chosen this path are not looking back because the peace they have found is genuine, and the routines of rest and personal activities serve them well in a world of rising costs and uncertainty. The desperation from women is a direct result of the gap left by the withdrawal, and the lashing out reflects the difficulty of adjusting to new circumstances without the support that was once taken for granted. The economic crisis, with its impact on rents, food, and overall living expenses, is exposing the vulnerabilities, and the government being unable to fully bridge the gap adds to the strain. This is the straightforward truth that stands as a wake up call for the times, and it will require clear thinking to navigate the future. As the trends accelerate and the full effects become apparent, the men have adapted successfully by embracing solitude and the contentment it brings, while the pressures on others intensify. And this contrast highlights the effectiveness of their choice. The patterns of the past, where interactions were often one sided, have been left behind, and the men are better for it, focusing on their own needs in a sustainable way. The women facing these challenges are in a position where the reality of self reliance is more demanding than anticipated, and the blame does not change the facts of the situation. The coming meltdown will test everyone, but those who have built lives of independence and peace will be better positioned to handle it. This is the raw and truthful account of what is happening, and it serves as a sobering reminder of the importance of balance and mutual benefit in human relationships. The men who walked away have found their equilibrium, and they are not inclined to abandon it for the sake of returning to dynamics that did not serve them well. The economic realities will continue to unfold, and the choices made now will shape the outcomes for years to come as costs climb and support systems adjust. The divide in experiences will grow, and the peace that men have secured through their decision will stand in stark relief to the struggles elsewhere. This is the core of the narrative, and it demands attention from anyone seeking to understand the shifts taking place in society today. The frustration from women is real, but it does not alter the fact that the men have moved on to lives that work for them, and the quiet nature of that move has made it lasting and effective. The broader collapse that is building will bring these issues to the forefront, and the lack of traditional networks will be felt most by those who relied on them previously. The truth is that interdependence was undervalued, and the consequences are now clear as the world changes. The men who chose solitude have shown a path forward that prioritizes self preservation and peace in the face of uncertainty. And this approach will serve them well as the economic pressures intensify and the options for others narrow. This is the sobering wake up call that cannot be ignored, and it will continue to play out as the trends of walking away gain even more momentum in the months and years ahead. The women who are now dealing with the fallout are confronting the practical limits of the independence they sought, and the reality of managing without male support is proving more challenging than expected. In a high cost environment, the government limitations on aid only add to the difficulty, and the cycle of desperation grows as the men remain content in their withdrawal. This is the authoritative picture of the current state, and it calls for a clear eyed view of how these dynamics developed over time through messages that encourage men to step back and women to go it alone without fully accounting for the economic and social costs. The men have responded by finding peace in their own space and routines that do not involve the drain of unbalanced relationships. And this has been a positive change for them amid the broader uncertainties. The lashing out from women reflects the discomfort of the new reality, but it does not bring back the support that has been withdrawn. The economic crisis, with its rising prices and housing pressures, is making the situation more acute, and the absence of previous buffers is felt daily. This is the straightforward truth of the moment, and it serves as a powerful call to reflect on the foundations of society. As we know it, the impending larger difficulties will amplify these issues, and the men who have already adapted will maintain their calm, while others face increasing strain. The choice to walk away was based on observation and self interest, and it has proven wise. As the world evolves, the peace that comes from solitude and simple living is real, and it stands as a contrast to the growing challenges elsewhere. This is the raw reality, and it will not change because the men have no reason to return to the old patterns that left them depleted. The women who are struggling are in a position where the need for solutions is urgent, yet the options are limited without the traditional networks, and the government being broke in terms of expanding programs only heightens the pressure. This is the sobering account of what is unfolding, and it demands honest engagement with the facts. As they stand, the men have listened and acted, and the consequences are now visible in the daily lives of those left to navigate without that involvement. The economic meltdown that is approaching will make these truths even more apparent as costs soar and stability becomes harder to achieve for those without self reliant structures. The truth is that men have found their path and they are sticking to it with the peace that comes from avoiding the exhaustion of the past. This is the core message, and it will resonate as the shifts continue and the full impact becomes clear. The desperation from women is understandable, but it does not reverse the decisions that have been made or the peace that has been secured. The broader societal changes are tied to these personal choices, and the result is a world where the absence of engagement is reshaping the landscape in profound ways. This is the truthful and straightforward view of the situation, and it serves as a wake up call for anyone paying attention to the direction we are heading as the cost of living crisis deepens and the government support wanes. The divide will grow, and the men who walked away will continue to enjoy their solitude, while the realities hit harder for others. The patterns that led to this point were clear, and the response was logical, leading to a sustainable way of life for those who chose it. The women facing the consequences are discovering the full weight of the independence that was championed, and the practical challenges are significant in the current economic climate. This is the authoritative reality, and it will not be altered by further demands or blame. The men have moved on, and the peace they have found is their reward for listening and acting on the messages of the past. The coming economic difficulties will test the resilience of everyone involved, but the foundation of self reliance that men have built will serve them well as the pressures mount and the options narrow. This is the sobering truth of the times, and it calls for clear thinking about how to navigate the future. As the trends of withdrawal continue to spread and the effects become more widespread, the frustration from women is a direct result of the gap that has been created, and the lashing out is a response to the loss of support that was once available. The economic conditions are not improving, and the lack of male involvement makes the situation more difficult for those who relied on it. The government being limited adds to the strain, and the cycle continues as costs rise and stability becomes elusive. This is the raw picture, and it demands acknowledgement of the facts. As they are, the men who have chosen this path are not suffering, but thriving in their simplicity, and the contentment is genuine. After years of different experiences, the broader collapse that is building will bring these issues to a head, and the absence of traditional safety nets will be felt most acutely by those who are now without them. The truth is that the walking away was a response to real observations, and it has led to a better outcome for the men involved. The women who are in difficult positions are confronting the limits of the system they helped shape, and the reality is unforgiving as inflation and housing costs continue to climb. This is the straightforward account of what is happening, and it serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of mutual benefit and balance in society. The men have found their peace, and they are maintaining it through their routines of rest and personal activities, while the world around them changes. The desperation from women grows as the pressures mount and the options for relief diminish. The economic crisis is exposing the vulnerabilities, and the government reductions only make it harder. This is the sobering wake up call that is unfolding, and it will continue to develop as the trends accelerate and the full consequences become apparent. The men who walked away have no intention of returning because the benefits of their choice are clear and the peace is real. The broader societal shifts are tied to these decisions, and the result is a new landscape where the absence of engagement is felt in multiple ways. This is the truthful view, and it cannot be denied, as the cost of living crisis sweeps across the Western world and the support systems falter. The divide in experiences will become even more pronounced, with men maintaining their calm and women facing increasing difficulties. The patterns of the past have been broken, and the new reality is one of self reliance for those who chose it. The women who are lashing out are reacting to the loss of the old dynamics, and the practical challenges are significant in the current climate. This is the authoritative reality of the situation, and it will require honest reflection to understand how we arrived here and where we are heading. As the economic meltdown approaches and the consequences play out, the men have secured their peace, and the choice has been validated by the outcomes. The desperation from women is real, but it does not change the fact that the withdrawal was complete and based on sound reasoning. The coming difficulties will amplify the issues, and the lack of networks will be a major factor in how individuals fare. This is the raw truth, and it stands as a call to examine the foundations of how we live and relate. The men who have embraced solitude are better positioned for the uncertainties ahead, and their routines serve them well in a time of rising costs and limited options. The women facing these challenges are in a position where the need for adaptation is urgent, yet the previous assumptions about support have been upended. This is the sobering picture, and it will not fade as the trends continue and the economic pressures intensify. The truth is that men listened to the calls and acted accordingly, finding peace in the process, while the outcomes for others have been different. The broader collapse is tied to these shifts, and the effects will be long lasting as the cost of living crisis deepens and government programs adjust. The gap will grow, and the peace that men have found will stand in contrast to the struggles elsewhere. This is the straightforward narrative of the moment, and it demands attention from anyone seeking to understand the changes taking place. The frustration from Women is a natural response to the new circumstances, and the lashing out reflects the difficulty of adjusting. Without the previous buffers, the economic realities are harsh, and the absence of male involvement makes them more so. The government being broke in terms of expanding aid adds to the pressure, and the cycle of strain continues. This is the authoritative account, and it serves as a wake up call for the times. The men who walked away have no reason to reverse their decision because the peace is genuine and the alternative was exhaustion. The broader societal changes are profound, and the result is a world where the dynamics have shifted permanently. The women who are now dealing with the fallout are confronting the full implications of the independence they sought, and the practical limits are clear in the current environment. This is the raw reality, and it will continue to unfold as the economic challenges build and the trends of withdrawal gain strength. The truth is that the movement is here to stay, and the consequences are being felt daily. The men have found their path, and they are sticking to it with contentment and self reliance while the pressures on others mount. This is the sobering truth of the situation, and it calls for clear eyed observation of how society is evolving in response to the choices made over decades. The desperation from women is growing as the cost of living crisis hits harder and the support networks are absent. The government limitations only exacerbate the issue, and the frustration builds. The men remain disengaged and peaceful in their routines of rest and personal activities. This is the straightforward view, and it highlights the effectiveness of the choice to walk away. The broader economic meltdown that is approaching will make these dynamics even more critical as resources become scarcer and stability harder to achieve for those without self built foundations. The truth is that interdependence was set aside, and the outcomes are now visible in the daily lives of millions. The men who have chosen this way have adapted well, and the peace they enjoy is a testament to the wisdom of their decision. The women facing the challenges are in a position where the reality of solo navigation is demanding, and the blame does not resolve the practical needs. The coming difficulties will test the limits, and the lack of traditional support will be a key factor. This is the raw and truthful picture of what is happening, and it serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of balance in human affairs. The men have secured their solitude, and the contentment is real. The economic pressures are not letting up, and the divide in experiences will widen as the crisis deepens. This is the authoritative reality, and it will not change. Because the withdrawal was based on clear observations and the benefits are evident. The frustration from women is understandable, but the men are not returning to the old cycles. The broader collapse is unfolding, and the effects will be widespread. The truth is that the walking away has created a new normal, and the peace for men is the outcome, while the struggles for others highlight the shifts. This is the sobering wake up call that is playing out in real time, and it demands honest engagement with the facts. As they stand, the men who have embraced this path are thriving in their simplicity, and the routines serve them well amid the uncertainty. The women who are lashing out are responding to the loss of options, and the practical difficulties are significant in the high cost environment. The government being limited adds to the strain, and the cycle continues. This is the straightforward truth, and it stands as a call to reflect on the direction of society. The economic meltdown will bring these issues to the forefront, and the absence of networks will be felt acutely. The men have found their equilibrium and they are maintaining it. The desperation from women grows, but the choice to walk away remains firm. This is the raw reality of the times, and it will continue to develop as the trends accelerate and the consequences become more apparent. The truth is that men listened and acted, finding peace in the process, while the outcomes for others have been different. The broader societal changes are tied to these personal decisions, and the result is a landscape where the dynamics have been reshaped permanently. The women facing these challenges are discovering the full weight of the independence they championed, and the practical challenges are unforgiving as costs rise and support fades. This is the authoritative account, and it serves as a sobering reminder of the importance of mutual roles and the consequences when they are abandoned. The men who have chosen solitude are better positioned for the future and their peace. Is genuine. The economic crisis, with its impact on daily life, is exposing the gaps, and the government reductions only make it harder. The frustration from women is real, but it does not alter the fact that the withdrawal was complete and effective. This is the truthful view, and it calls for clear thinking about how to move forward. As the meltdown approaches and the trends continue, the men have no intention of re engaging because the benefits of their choice are clear and lasting. The broader picture shows a society in transition with the absence of male involvement, creating new realities for everyone involved. The women who are in difficult positions are confronting the limits of the system, and the reality is hitting hard. The coming economic difficulties will amplify the issues, and the lack of safety nets will be a major factor. This is the sobering truth, and it cannot be ignored. The men who walked away have found their path, and the contentment is their reward. The desperation from women is a response to the changes, and the lashing out reflects the difficulty of adjustment. The economic pressures are mounting and the divide is growing. This is the raw narrative of the moment, and it demands attention from anyone observing the shifts in society. The truth is that the movement is irreversible and the peace for men is secured, while the struggles for others highlight the consequences of the past messages. This is the authoritative reality, and it will play out as the cost of living crisis deepens and the government support wanes. The men remain content in their routines, and the choice has proven wise. The women facing the fallout are in a position where adaptation is necessary, yet the options are limited. The broader collapse is building, and the effects will be significant. This is the straightforward account, and it serves as a wake up call for the times the men who have embraced this way of life are thriving in their solitude, and the peace is real. The economic conditions are challenging, and the absence of support makes it more so for those who relied on it. The government being broke adds to the pressure, and the cycle of strain continues. This is the truthful picture, and it stands as a powerful call to examine the foundations of how we live. The men have secured their peace, and they are not looking back. The desperation from women grows as the reality set in, and the lashing out is a natural reaction. The coming meltdown will test everyone, and the self reliance of men will serve them well. This is the sobering wake up call that is unfolding, and it will continue to shape the future as the trends of walking away spread and the consequences become more widespread. The truth is that the decision was based on facts and the outcomes are clear. The women who are struggling are discovering the practical limits of independence, and the challenges are significant in the current climate. This is the raw reality, and it cannot be wished away. The men have found their equilibrium, and the routines bring fulfillment. The economic crisis is exposing the vulnerabilities, and the lack of networks is felt daily. The government limitations heighten the urgency, and the frustration builds. This is the authoritative view, and it calls for honest reflection on the direction we are heading. The men who walked away have no reason to return, and the peace they enjoy is lasting. The broader societal shifts are profound, and the result is a new way of life for many. The women facing these challenges are in a position where the need for solutions is urgent. The coming difficulties will bring these issues to a head, and the absence of traditional support will be key. This is the straightforward truth, and it serves as a sobering reminder of the importance of balance. The men have adapted successfully, and the contentment is genuine. The desperation from women is real, but the choice remains firm. The economic pressures are not easing, and the divide will widen. This is the raw account of what is happening, and it demands clear thinking as the meltdown approaches. The truth is that men listened, and the consequences are playing out. The women who are lashing out are responding to the loss, and the practical difficulties are mounting. The government being limited adds to the strain, and the cycle continues. This is the truthful narrative, and it stands as a wake up call for society. The men who have chosen this path are thriving in their simplicity, and the peace is their reward. The broader collapse is unfolding, and the effects will be long lasting. The women facing the fallout are confronting the full implications, and the reality is unforgiving. This is the authoritative reality, and it will not change. The men have secured their solitude, and the routines serve them well. The economic crisis, with its rising costs, is making the situation more acute, and the absence of support is felt. The frustration from women grows, but the withdrawal is complete. This is the sobering truth, and it calls for acknowledgement of the facts as they stand. The men who walked away have found their path, and the contentment is real. The desperation from women is a response to the changes, and the lashing out reflects the difficulty. The coming economic meltdown will amplify the issues, and the self reliance of men will prove valuable. This is the raw picture, and it serves as a powerful call to reflect on the past and the future. The truth is that the movement is here to stay, and the peace for men is secured, while the struggles for others highlight the shifts. This is the straightforward view, and it demands attention from anyone concerned with the direction of society. The women who are in difficult positions are discovering the limits of the system. They help shape, and the practical challenges are significant. The government reductions only make it harder, and the cycle of strain builds. The men remain disengaged and peaceful in their routines. This is the authoritative account, and it stands as a sobering wake up call for the times the economic pressures are mounting and the divide in experiences is growing. The men have adapted, and the choice has been validated. The women facing these challenges are in a position where adaptation is urgent. The broader collapse is building, and the effects will be widespread. This is the truthful narrative, and it cannot be denied. The men who have embraced solitude are better positioned for the uncertainties ahead, and their peace is genuine. The desperation from women grows as the reality set in, and the lashing out is understandable but ineffective. The economic conditions are harsh, and the lack of support makes them more so. This is the raw reality, and it will continue to unfold as the trends accelerate and the consequences become more apparent. The truth is that the walking away was a logical response, and the outcomes are clear. The women who are struggling are confronting the full weight of the independence they sought, and the challenges are unforgiving. The government being limited adds to the pressure, and the frustration builds. The men have found their equilibrium, and the routines bring fulfillment. This is the sobering truth, and it serves as a call to examine the foundations of society. The broader societal changes are tied to these personal choices, and the result is a new landscape. The men who walked away have no intention of reversing their decision because the benefits are evident. The economic crisis is exposing the gaps, and the absence of networks is felt daily. This is the authoritative reality, and it demands clear thinking as the meltdown approaches. The desperation from women is real, but the choice to walk away remains firm. The coming difficulties will test the resilience of everyone, and the self reliance of men will serve them well. This is the straightforward account, and it highlights the effectiveness of the decision. The truth is that men listened to the messages and acted accordingly. Finding peace in the process, the women facing the fallout are in a position where the need for solutions is urgent and the options are limited. The broader collapse is unfolding, and the effects will be significant. This is the raw narrative of the moment, and it stands as a powerful wake up call. The men have secured their peace, and the routines serve them well. The economic pressures are not letting up, and the divide is growing. The frustration from women is a natural response, but it does not alter the facts. The government limitations heighten the urgency, and the cycle continues. This is the truthful view, and it calls for honest reflection on how we arrived here and where we are heading. The men who have chosen this path are thriving in their simplicity, and the contentment is genuine. The women who are lashing out are reacting to the loss of the old dynamics, and the practical difficulties are mounting. This is the sobering picture, and it will not fade as the cost of living crisis deepens and the support systems falter. The truth is that the movement is irreversible, and the peace for men is lasting. The broader societal shifts are profound, and the result is a world where the dynamics have been reshaped. The women facing these challenges are discovering the practical limits, and the reality is hitting hard. The coming economic meltdown will amplify the issues, and the lack of traditional safety nets will be a key factor. This is the authoritative account, and it serves as a wake up call for anyone paying attention. The men have adapted successfully, and the choice has proven wise. The desperation from women grows as the pressures mount and the options for relief diminish. The economic conditions are challenging, and the absence of male involvement makes them more so. This is the raw truth, and it stands as a call to acknowledge the facts as they stand. The men who walked away have found their path, and the peace is real. The frustration from women is understandable, but the withdrawal is complete and effective. The broader collapse is building, and the effects will be long lasting. This is the straightforward narrative, and it demands attention from society. The truth is that the decision was based on observation, and the outcomes are clear. The women who are in difficult positions are confronting the full implications of the shifts, and the challenges are significant. The government being limited adds to the strain, and the cycle of desperation continues. The men remain content in their routines, and the choice is firm. This is the sobering wake up call that is playing out, and it will continue to shape the future. As the trends spread and the consequences become more widespread, the men have secured their solitude, and the fulfillment is genuine. The economic crisis, with its rising costs, is making the situation more acute, and the gap is felt daily. The lashing out from women reflects the difficulty of adjustment, but it does not change the reality. The coming difficulties will test everyone, and the self reliance of men will prove valuable. This is the truthful picture, and it calls for clear eyed observation of the changes taking place. The broader societal changes are tied to these choices, and the result is a new normal. The women facing the fallout are in a position where adaptation is necessary, yet the previous assumptions have been upended. This is the raw reality, and it cannot be ignored. The men who have embraced this way of life are better positioned for the uncertainties, and their peace is their reward. The desperation from women is a response to the new circumstances, and the practical challenges are significant. This is the authoritative reality, and it stands as a powerful reminder of the importance of balance and mutual benefit. The economic pressures are mounting, and the divide will widen as the crisis deepens. The truth is that the walking away has created lasting change, and the peace for men is secured, while the struggles for others highlight the consequences. The men have no reason to return, and the routine served them well. The government limitations heighten the urgency, and the frustration builds. This is the sobering truth, and it serves as a call to reflect on the direction of society. The broader collapse is unfolding, and the effects will be widespread. The women who are lashing out are reacting to the loss, and the reality is unforgiving. The coming meltdown will bring these issues to the forefront, and the absence of support will be felt acutely. This is the straightforward account, and it demands honest engagement with the facts. The men who walked away have found their equilibrium, and the contentment is real. The economic conditions are harsh, and the lack of networks makes them more. So the truth is that men listened, And the outcomes are playing out as expected. The women facing these challenges are discovering the limits of the system, and the practical difficulties are mounting. This is the raw narrative, and it will continue to develop as the trends accelerate. The men have secured their peace, and the choice is lasting. The desperation from women grows, but the withdrawal is complete. This is the authoritative view, and it calls for clear thinking about the future as the economic meltdown approaches and the consequences become more apparent. The broader societal shifts are profound, and the result is a landscape where the dynamics have changed permanently. The women who are in difficult positions are confronting the full weight of the independence they sought, and the challenges are significant in the current climate. This is the sobering wake up call, and it serves as a powerful call to examine how we live and relate. The men have adapted, and the peace is genuine. The economic crisis is exposing the gaps, and the absence of male involvement is felt. The frustration from women is real, but the men remain disengaged and content. This is the truthful picture, and it stands as a reminder of the importance of self reliance in uncertain times. The coming difficulties will test the resilience of everyone, and the self built foundations of men will serve them well. The truth is that the movement is here to stay, and the outcomes are clear. The women facing the fallout are in a position where the need for adaptation is urgent, the broader collapse is building, and the effects will be long lasting. This is the raw reality, and it demands attention from anyone observing the shifts in society. The men who have chosen this path are thriving in their simplicity, and the routines bring fulfillment. The desperation from women is a natural response to the changes, and the lashing out reflects the difficulty. The economic pressures are not easing, and the divide is growing. This is the authoritative account, and it will not change. The men have found their path, and the peace is real. The government being limited adds to the strain, and the cycle continues. The truth is that the walking away was a wise decision, and the benefits are evident. The women who are struggling are confronting the practical limits, and the reality is hitting hard. The coming economic meltdown will amplify the issues, and the lack of traditional safety nets will be a major factor. This is the sobering truth, and it calls for honest reflection on the past and the future. The men remain content in their solitude, and the choice is firm. The frustration from women grows as the pressures mount and the options narrow. This is the straightforward narrative, and it serves as a wake up call for the times. The broader societal changes are tied to these personal decisions, and the result is a new way of life for millions. The women facing these challenges are discovering the full implications, and the practical challenges are unforgiving. The economic crisis, with its impact on daily life, is making the situation more acute. This is just the raw picture, and it will continue to unfold as the trends of withdrawal gain strength. The men have secured their peace, and the routines serve them well. The desperation from women is real, but the withdrawal is complete and effective. The truth is that men listen to the messages, and the consequences are now visible. The government limitations heighten the urgency, and the cycle of strain builds. The coming difficulties will test everyone, and the self reliance of men will prove valuable. This is the authoritative reality, and it stands as a powerful call to acknowledge the facts as they stand. The men who walked away have found their equilibrium, and the contentment is genuine. The economic pressures are mounting, and the divide in experiences is widening. The women who are lashing out are reacting to the loss of the old dynamics, and the practical difficulties are significant. This is the sobering wake up call that is playing out in real time, and it demands clear thinking as the meltdown approaches. The broader collapse is unfolding, and the effects will be widespread. The truth is that the decision to walk away was based on observation, and the outcomes are clear. The women facing the fallout are in a position where adaptation is necessary, yet the options are limited. The men have no intention of reversing their choice because the peace is lasting. The economic conditions are harsh, and the absence of support makes them more. So, this is the raw narrative, and it serves as a reminder of the importance of balance in human affairs. The frustration from women is understandable, but it does not alter the facts. The government being limited adds to the pressure, and the cycle continues. The men remain disengaged and peaceful in their routines. This is the truthful view, and it calls for honest engagement with the direction of society. The broader societal shifts are profound, and the result is a landscape where the dynamics have been reshaped permanently. The women who are in difficult positions are confronting the full weight of the changes, and the challenges are significant. This is the authoritative account, and it will not fade as the cost of living crisis deepens and the support systems falter. The truth is that the movement is irreversible and the peace for men is secured. The desperation from women grows as the reality set in, and the lashing out is a response to the new circumstances. The coming economic meltdown will bring these issues to the forefront, and the lack of networks will be felt acutely. This is the straightforward truth, and it demands attention from anyone concerned with the shifts taking place. The men who have embraced solitude are better positioned for the uncertainties ahead, and their routines bring fulfillment. The economic crisis is exposing the vulnerabilities, and the absence of male involvement is felt daily. The frustration from women is real, but the choice to walk away remains firm. This is the sobering picture, and it serves as a powerful wake up call. The broader collapse is building, and the effects will be long lasting. The truth is that men acted on the messages of the past, and the consequences are playing out as expected. The women facing these challenges are discovering the practical limits of independence, and the reality is unforgiving. The government reductions only make it harder, and the cycle of strain builds. The men have found their path, and the peace is genuine. This is the raw reality, and it cannot be ignored. The economic pressures are mounting, and the divide will widen as the crisis deepens. The desperation from women is a natural response, and the lashing out reflects the difficulty of adjustment. The coming difficulties will test the resilience of everyone, and the self reliance of men will serve them well. This is the authoritative narrative, and it stands as a call to reflect on how we arrived here. The men who walked away have no reason to return, and the benefits of their choice are clear. The women who are struggling are in a position where the need for solutions is urgent. The broader societal changes are tied to these decisions, and the result is a new normal. This is the truthful account, and it will continue to develop as the trends accelerate and the consequences become more apparent. The truth is that the walking away has created lasting change, and the peace for men is real. The economic conditions are challenging, and the absence of support makes the situation more acute for those who relied on it. The government being limited adds to the pressure, and the frustration builds. The men remain content in their routines, and the choice is firm. This is the sobering wake up call, and it demands clear thinking about the future. As the meltdown approaches, the broader collapse is unfolding, and the effects will be significant. The women facing the fallout are confronting the full implications, and the practical challenges are mounting. This is the raw picture, and it serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of mutual benefit. The men have secured their solitude, and the fulfillment is genuine. The desperation from women grows, but the withdrawal is complete. The truth is that the decision was wise, and the outcomes are evident. The economic crisis is exposing the gaps, and the lack of networks is felt. The coming difficulties will amplify the issues, and the self reliance of men will prove valuable. This is the authoritative reality, and it calls for honest reflection on the direction we are heading. The men who have chosen this path are thriving in their simplicity, and the peace is their reward. The frustration from women is understandable, but it does not change the facts. The government limitations heighten the urgency, and the cycle continues. This is the straightforward narrative, and it stands as a wake up call for society. The broader societal shifts are profound, and the result is a world where the dynamics have changed. The women who are in difficult positions are discovering the limits of the system, and the reality is hitting hard. The economic pressures are not easing, and the divide is growing. This is the truthful view, and it demands attention from anyone observing. The changes the men have adapted successfully, and the choice has been validated. The desperation from women is real, but the peace for men is lasting. The coming economic meltdown will test everyone, and the absence of traditional safety nets will be a key factor. This is the raw reality, and it cannot be wished away. The truth is that men listened and acted. The women facing these challenges are in a position where adaptation is urgent. The broader collapse is building and the effects will be widespread. The men remain disengaged and content in their routines. This is the sobering truth, and it serves as a powerful call to examine the foundations of society. The economic crisis, with its rising cost, is making the situation more acute, and the gap is felt daily. The frustration from women grows as the pressures mount and the options narrow. This is the authoritative account, and it will not change. The men who walked away have found their equilibrium, and the contentment is genuine. The desperation from women is a response to the new circumstances, and the practical difficulties are significant. The government being limited adds to the strain, and the cycle of strain builds. This is the straightforward truth, and it stands as a reminder of the importance of self reliance. The broader societal changes are tied to these personal choices, and the result is a new landscape. The women who are lashing out are reacting to the loss, and the reality is unforgiving. The coming difficulties will bring these issues to the forefront, and the lack of support will be felt acutely. This is the raw narrative, and it demands clear thinking as the trends continue. The truth is that the movement is here to stay, and the peace for men is secured. The economic conditions are harsh, and the absence of male involvement makes them more so. The desperation from women grows, but the withdrawal is complete and effective. This is the sobering wake up call that is unfolding, and it will continue to shape the future. The men have secured their solitude, and the routine served them well. The frustration from women is real, but it does not alter the facts. The broader collapse is unfolding, and the effects will be long lasting. This is the truthful picture, and it calls for honest engagement with the facts. The women facing the fallout are in a position where the need for adaptation is urgent and the options are limited. The economic crisis is exposing the vulnerabilities and the gap is growing. The men who have chosen this path are thriving and the choice is firm. This is the authoritative reality, and it stands as a powerful wake up call for the times. Now, when you step back and consider the full weight of what this shift really means for everyone involved, it starts to paint a picture that goes way beyond the surface level frustrations and into the structural changes happening across families, economies, and even the way people think about their futures. Because men have not just pulled away from relationships and dating, but they have redirected their focus toward building lives that feel sustainable in a world where the old rules no longer add up. And one of the clearest ways this shows up is in how they spend their downtime with video games, offering entire universes of strategy, competition, and mastery that deliver a sense of accomplishment without any of the hidden costs that used to come attached to trying to maintain connections that drained more than they ever gave back. And this is not about hiding from responsibility, but about choosing activities that actually restore a man after years of being expected to handle everything from fixing things around the house to providing emotional support or covering expenses that never seem to get repaid in kind. It is like finally putting down a load that was never meant to be carried alone, and instead investing that time into something that feels rewarding and controlled, where the outcomes depend on skill and effort rather than unpredictable feelings or expectations that shift with the wind. And meanwhile, the broader economy keeps tightening its grip with food prices fluctuating wildly and housing becoming a distant dream for many without dual incomes or family support, which leaves women who once counted on that male presence now staring down the barrel of monthly bills that eat up paychecks faster than they can earn them, especially when government programs that used to offer a cushion are tightening their belts with stricter rules around work requirements and training that catch a lot of single mothers off guard after relying on different arrangements for so long. And this creates a chain reaction where the independence that was sold as empowering starts to reveal its raw edges as women find themselves handling every aspect of daily survival solo without the backup of partners or male friends who used to step in for rides, repairs, or just a listening ear during tough times. And the truth is that men saw this coming from miles away after watching patterns repeat, where their role was reduced to being the reliable one in situations that offered little reciprocity. And so they chose the path of least resistance by focusing inward on rest and hobbies that do not demand constant output. And that choice has brought a level of mental clarity that many had forgotten was possible in the hustle of trying to keep everyone else afloat. As the months turn into years, this pattern of men prioritizing their own space and peace has started to reshape entire communities in ways that no one fully anticipated when the calls for separation first gained traction, because what began as individual decisions to step back has snowballed into a collective movement where millions are living simpler lives free from the pressure of being the default provider, and instead they are channeling their energy into personal growth or just straight up enjoying the quiet that comes from not having to negotiate every interaction or worry about being labeled or shamed for simply existing as a man in a society that seemed determined to paint them as the problem. And video games play a big part in this because they provide an outlet for competition and problem solving that feels fair and straightforward, unlike the real world dynamics where efforts often went unnoticed or were met with demands for more without any give and take. And this is where the sobering part hits hard, because while men are finding this balance and building routines that keep them steady through inflation spikes and job market twists, the women who pushed hardest for that distance are now facing the practical fallout in the form of mounting debts and isolation that no amount of online venting can fix. And you see it in the growing number of stories where women talk openly about living in their cars or skipping meals to make rent because the safety nets they trusted have holes that the government is no longer rushing to patch with budget cuts and new eligibility hurdles that require proof of training or employment, which many were not set up to meet after depending on other arrangements. And the raw truth here is that nature did not design anyone to thrive in complete isolation, especially not in an economy that punishes solo living with higher costs for everything from utilities to groceries. And men who have walked away understand this on a deep level, which is why they are not rushing back into roles that left them exhausted and underappreciated, but are instead holding firm to their solitude as the smarter play for long term survival. And this creates a divide that keeps widening as economic pressures mount, with the cost of living crisis hitting urban areas particularly hard, where rents have doubled in some spots while wages lag behind, leaving women without that traditional male support, scrambling for solutions that do not exist in the same abundance as before. And it is not about celebrating one side over the other, but about acknowledging the straightforward reality that when half the population opts out of the old script, the entire system feels the strain in ways that expose how much interdependence was quietly holding things together all along. The desperation that builds from this kind of shift is something to watch because it turns into public expressions of anger and confusion, where women point fingers at men for abandoning them after decades of being told to do exactly that. And yet the men remain unmoved because they have lived through the cycle of being the emotional tampon, the free ride, the repair guy, and the walking wallet, only to be met with one sided friendships or dating setups that were really about securing benefits without the commitment. And so they learned the hard way that conversations based on feelings rather than mutual facts lead nowhere productive, which is why the silent walk away feels like the only logical response. And this leaves women in a position where their previous strategies of shaming or demanding change no longer land because there is no one left to argue with or pressure into compliance. And instead, the focus turns inward to self reliance in a landscape where government assistance is shrinking and the gravy train that was promised as a replacement for family and community support has slowed to a crawl with requirements that demand more personal accountability at a time when inflation is eating away at any savings and food costs are climbing to levels that force tough choices between basics and bills. And men on the other side are months ahead in terms of stability because they are not splitting resources or carrying extra loads, which allows them to weather the storm with routines built around rest and activities that keep their minds engaged without the burnout that came from constant giving. And this contrast is what makes the situation so sobering because it shows how choices made years ago have real world consequences that cannot be undone, with more demands or blame, and the women who are now dealing with extreme poverty risks after becoming homeless or living paycheck to paycheck are realizing that the protection and partnership they once took for granted was not optional but essential for navigating hard times. And yet, the messages of the past encouraged throwing that away in favor of state promises that have not held up under the weight of budget realities and broader economic strain that look set to dwarf anything seen in previous downturns, with experts pointing to indicators like rising debt levels and slowing growth that signal a meltdown on the horizon far more severe than the Great Depression. Because back then, there were still family structures and community ties to fall back on, whereas now many women stand alone without husbands, boyfriends, or even close male friends after those relationships were walked away from. What makes this even more telling is how men have adapted by embracing the solitude as a form of strength rather than a loss, because in that space, they rediscover the value of their own time and energy without it being siphoned off into dynamics that left them feeling used. And the video games and rest become symbols of that reclaimed peace offering challenges that reward effort directly and downtime that actually refreshes the body and mind after years of being on call for everyone else. And this is the part that hits like a wake up call. Because while society keeps pushing narratives about equality and independence, the ground level reality is showing cracks where women are left to handle the full brunt of rising expenses and reduced support networks. And the government cuts to social programs only compound the issue by requiring work or education that many single mothers find difficult to balance with childcare or existing obligations, leaving them in a bind that no amount of online movements or calls for men to return can resolve. And men are not falling for the renewed pleas because they have seen through the patterns of gaslighting and unbalanced expectations that defined so many interactions before. And instead, they focus on the quiet satisfaction of lives that do not revolve around being the rescuer or provider, which frees them up to enjoy simple pleasures and build stability on their own terms. And this choice is spreading because it aligns with the harsh truths of the current economy, where costs outpace incomes and the dating scene has dried up as men grow wise to setups that were often just excuses for free meals or attention without any real return. And the result is a landscape where women are confronting the limits of going it alone in ways that feel increasingly desperate as the screams for help grow louder but fall on ears that have tuned out after too many cycles of the same unreciprocated demands. Pushing further into what lies ahead, it becomes obvious that this withdrawal is setting the stage for bigger societal adjustments because with men no longer stepping into traditional roles, the birth rates continue to drop as fewer people commit to family life under conditions that feel stacked against stability. And this is not some abstract trend, but a direct outcome of men choosing self preservation over risking everything in relationships that history and personal experience showed often ended in loss and exhaustion. And women who once assumed that male desire for connection or children would always keep the door open are now seeing that survival instincts win out when the costs are too high and the rewards too uncertain, especially in an environment where economic pressures make every decision about money and time feel critical, and the government being unable to fully replace the lost support with expanded programs only adds to the pressure as budgets tighten and requirements increase, forcing more individual effort at a time when many are already stretched thin from the cost of living crisis that shows no signs of easing, with rents and food prices continuing their upward climb across the Western world. And men on their end are content to let the chips fall where they may, because they have built lives around low demand activities that keep them afloat without the need to re enter the fray. And this raw reality serves as the ultimate wake up call because it reveals how the push for separation ignored the basic design of human interdependence, where men and women complemented each other in ways that provided protection and shared burdens. And now, with that balance disrupted, the consequences are playing out in real time as women face poverty risks that were not part of the original vision and men maintain their peace through deliberate distance and focused routines. The irony thickens when you consider how the earlier movements that targeted men with broad accusations and calls for eradication or behavioral overhaul backfired completely. Because once men internalized those messages and acted on them by walking away entirely, the power dynamic flipped in a way no one saw coming, and now women are left without the very support systems they dismantled in favor of state reliance that has proven unreliable as programs get cut. And the world heads toward economic turbulence that will make the Great Depression look mild by comparison with supply chain issues, debt levels, and inflation combining into a perfect storm that leaves those without strong personal networks in the most vulnerable spots. And men who have already adapted are positioned to navigate it with their emphasis on self reliance and peace, while the lashing out from women continues as a response to the harshness of facing reality without the buffers they once had. And this is where the straightforward truth lands hardest, because arguing or debating will not change the fact that men have learned the futility of engaging in cycles that always left them on the losing end. And so they stay silent and focused on their own path, which is the most effective response possible. And as the cost of living crisis deepens, with more women ending up in cars or struggling to cover basics, the divide in experiences becomes impossible to ignore, with men resting easy in their solitude and women confronting the full weight of independence without the partnership that once made survival manageable. Continuing along this line, the psychological relief that men experience in this new phase cannot be overstated because after decades of being cast as the problem or the one who needs to cry more or change more, they have finally said enough and turned that energy inward, where it actually serves them through hobbies like video games that allow for immersion and achievement on their terms, or simple rest that rebuilds the mental reserves depleted by years of being. The emotional support, the handyman, the ride giver, and the bill payer without equivalent value coming back. And this shift is not temporary, but a fundamental realignment that has gained momentum as economic conditions worsen and the dating economy grinds to a halt, with men informed enough to spot patterns of use and opt out entirely. And the women who are now vocal about their financial struggles in online spaces are essentially admitting the system they championed has left them exposed with no husbands, no boyfriends, no male friends, and no robust government fallback. as programs demand more self sufficiency and the broader meltdown approaches, with indicators pointing to hardships 10 times worse than anything in living memory. And yet the men do not rush to intervene because they have realized that protecting women from reality only delayed the inevitable. And now the harshness is here to stay without the old safety nets of family or community to soften the blow. This brings us to the core of why the movement feels so irreversible, because men have tasted the freedom of lives unburdened by one sided obligations, and they are not inclined to trade that back for the exhaustion of old dynamics, no matter how loud the calls become or how desperate the situations grow. With rising rents, food costs, and inflation creating daily battles for stability that hit hardest, those who lack shared resources and the government cuts only accelerate the pressure by ending the era of easy assistance and requiring proof of effort that many were not prepared for after different circumstances. And men who have walked away are living proof that peace can be found in simplicity, focusing on rest and personal pursuits that keep them grounded and content, while the world around them shifts in unpredictable ways. And this is the sobering wake up call that resonates through every layer of society, because it shows the limits of social engineering that ignored basic human needs for balance and support, and instead promoted separation that has now left gaps too wide to bridge with words or demands alone. And as the economic realities continue to unfold, the choices made by men to prioritize their own survival stand as a model of adaptation that others may eventually have to learn the hard way. The future projections only sharpen the contrast, because with birth rates plummeting and fewer men interested in fatherhood under current conditions, the population dynamics are set to change in profound ways as men opt for solitude over risky investments in relationships that offered little security. And women who once believed they could have it all without the traditional trade offs are now seeing the practical fallout in the form of loneliness, financial strain, and a society that no longer provides the same level of male engagement. And the raw truth is that nature built in certain interdependencies for a reason. And when those are cast aside in favor of independence, the costs reveal themselves over time, especially in tough economic climates where the absence of partnership turns small problems into major crises. And men have no interest in reinserting themselves as the fixers, because they have moved on to lives that work for them, with video games and rest serving as anchors in a sea of uncertainty. And this leaves women up against the full force of reality, without the paddles they discarded us years ago when the state promised to take over. And now, with that promise faltering, the desperation grows, but the men stay disengaged, holding to the peace they have earned through deliberate withdrawal. Wrapping this layer of the discussion, and it all circles back to the fundamental observation that men have listened completely to the messages directed their way and responded in the only sustainable manner, by building lives of self focus and calm that do not depend on re entering unbalanced cycles. And as the cost of living crisis persists with its grip on housing, food, and daily expenses, the women left to navigate solo are discovering just how much the previous setup relied on male involvement for practical and emotional stability, and the government being limited in its ability to fill those voids only heightens the urgency as programs shrink and requirements rise, leaving many in positions of extreme vulnerability without the networks that once provided a buffer. And men on their path are not looking to rescue or debate, because they have seen the futility of that approach, and instead they embrace the quiet power of their choice, which allows them to face the coming meltdown with a level of preparedness that comes from years of low demand living and focused energy on what truly serves them. And this is the authoritative yet raw picture of where things stand, a sobering reminder that actions have consequences, and the walk away has created a new reality that no one can ignore as the trends continue to unfold. Now, if you follow the thread of these changes deep enough, it becomes clear that the real transformation is happening at the level of daily decision making, where men are no longer factoring in the expectations of relationships or societal pressure into their plans. And instead, they are mapping out futures centered entirely on what keeps them stable and content in the face of uncertainty. And this shows up in everything from career choices to how they allocate their money. Because when you are not pouring resources into dates or maintaining connections that demand constant upkeep, you suddenly have breathing room to handle your own bills without the added weight of someone else's. And video games fit right into that picture as a way to unwind that delivers satisfaction on demand without the emotional negotiations or surprise expenses that used to creep into old routines. And the sobering part is that this shift is accelerating as the cost of living keeps climbing with grocery bills that eat bigger chunks of paychecks and housing markets that make solo apartments feel like luxuries rather than basics, which leaves women who built their lives around the assumption of shared support now carrying every ounce of that load alone. And the government programs that once stepped in are pulling back further with rules that insist on job training or employment hours before any help flows through. And that catches a lot of single mothers in a tough spot after they had arranged their days around different kinds of assistance that no longer exists in the same form. And men who have stepped away see this unfolding from a distance without feeling the need to jump back in because they have already lived the reality of being the one who covers the gap, only to watch it widen again when the next crisis hits. And instead, they focus on routines that build their own resilience through rest and activities that recharge them without draining the tank completely. Looking at the wider ripple effects, it starts to sink in that entire industries and social structures are adjusting quietly to the absence of men who used to fill certain roles without question. And you see it in how dating apps have slowed down with fewer men logging on or initiating because they have learned that many interactions lead straight to expectations of payment or emotional labor without any balance coming the other direction. And this leaves women navigating a landscape where approaches have dried up and the old strategies of shaming or calling out men for not stepping up fall flat since there is no audience left to pressure, and the economic squeeze only makes the situation tighter as inflation pushes food and rent higher across cities and suburbs, forcing choices between eating properly or keeping a roof overhead. And for women who relied on male friends or partners to help with practical things like car repairs or moving heavy items or even just a safe ride home. After a long shift, those options have vanished, leaving them to figure it all out solo in ways that expose how much the previous setup depended on that invisible network of support, and men on their side are months ahead in preparation for harder times because they are not splitting their focus or resources, and instead they sink into the peace of their own space, where video games provide a controlled world of progress and rest restores the energy that used to get spent on one sided conversations. And this contrast is what makes the whole thing feel like a hard wake up call because it shows that when people walk away from unbalanced dynamics, the ones left behind start to feel the full force of reality without the cushion they once counted on. And the government being stretched thin means the safety nets are shrinking faster than anyone planned, with new requirements that demand proof of effort, which many were not geared up to meet after depending on looser arrangements for years. The long term picture that emerges from all this is one where demographic trends shift in ways that will echo for generations because fewer men are committing to family life when the risks feel too high and the rewards too uncertain in an economy that demands every dollar count toward personal survival. And this is not some sudden choice, but the result of watching patterns repeat where efforts in relationships led to exhaustion without the mutual investment that keeps things sustainable. And women who once assumed that biological clocks or social pressure would pull men back in are discovering that survival priorities take over when the math no longer adds up and the raw truth lands when you consider how birth rates keep dropping as men opt for the simplicity of solitude over building households that could crumble under financial strain. And this creates a future where communities look different with smaller families and more people living independently, which in turn puts even more pressure on systems that were built around traditional setups. And meanwhile, the cost of living crisis continues its march, with housing prices that lock out younger generations and food costs that force creative budgeting just to stay afloat, and for women facing this without the backup of partners or close male friends. The isolation compounds the financial stress, turning everyday challenges into major hurdles that no online movement can resolve. And men who have walked away are content to let the trends play out because they have built lives around low maintenance routines that include video games for engagement and rest for recovery. And this approach keeps them steady as the broader economy shows signs of deeper trouble, with debt levels rising and growth slowing in patterns that hint at a meltdown bigger than anything recent history has seen. And the government cuts to social programs only tighten the screws further, requiring more personal accountability at a time when many are already running on empty after years of different circumstances. What stands out in this phase is how men have internalized the lessons of past interactions and turned them into a deliberate strategy of self preservation that feels natural once you break free from the old script. And they are no longer willing to play the role of emotional support or financial buffer because they have seen how those positions lead to depletion without equivalent returns. And instead, they channel their energy into pursuits that deliver direct results like mastering a game level or simply enjoying uninterrupted downtime. And this shift brings a clarity that was missing when every decision had to account for someone else's needs. And the sobering wake up call comes when you realize that women are now confronting the same economic pressures, but without the network that once softened the blows, and the desperation shows in public calls for men to return to providing or dating. But those appeals land on deaf ears because the patterns of gaslighting and unbalanced expectations have been recognized and rejected entirely. And as inflation keeps driving up, the price of basics and rents climb in major areas. The women who end up in precarious housing situations or skipping essentials to make ends meet are learning the hard way that independence without support structures carries a steep cost. And the government being unable to expand assistance means the era of easy relief is over, with stricter rules around work or training that catch many off guard. And men who have chosen this path are positioned well ahead because they are not carrying extra loads or negotiating shared expenses, and their focus on peace through simple living gives them a buffer that feels solid in uncertain times. Pushing into the cultural layer of these changes, it becomes apparent that the narratives around relationships and gender roles are cracking under the weight of real world outcomes, because for years, the story was that men needed to step back and give space. And now that they have done exactly that on a massive scale, the fallout is exposing gaps that no policy or slogan can fill. And you see women in various spaces discussing their financial struggles, openly wondering why approaches have stopped and why the support they counted on has evaporated. And the truth is that men have moved on to lives where video games and rest replace the drain of one sided dynamics, offering worlds of control and accomplishment that real life interactions often failed to provide. And this is not about avoidance, but about choosing sustainability over cycles that left them feeling used. And the economic reality only reinforces the choice, as costs for everything from groceries to utilities rise faster than incomes, allowing men to stretch their resources further when they keep them for themselves. And for women navigating solo, the picture is different, with the full brunt of the cost of living crisis landing. Without the buffer of male involvement, whether it was free help with tasks or emotional availability during tough stretches, and the government programs that were supposed to act as the new foundation are being reformed with requirements that demand more effort, leaving single mothers in particular scrambling to meet criteria they were not prepared for after relying on other setups. And this creates a chain of increasing difficulty where rising expenses compound the lack of networks and the frustration builds. But the men stay disengaged, holding to the peace they have found in their routines. The deeper you look at the psychological side, the more it stands out that men have reclaimed a sense of agency that was eroded by years of being cast as the default problem or the one who always needed to adjust. And now, in their solitude, they experience a level of mental freedom that comes from no longer walking on eggshells or second guessing every word. And video games become a healthy outlet for that reclaimed energy, providing challenges that reward skill and persistence without the unpredictable emotional landmines of past relationships. And rest turns into a deliberate practice that rebuilds what was worn down by constant giving. And this balance feels authentic and sustainable in a world where economic pressures make every choice count. And women who are facing the other side of the equation are dealing with the weight of full independence without the partnerships that once made hard times more bearable. And the raw truth is that the earlier movements, which painted men broadly as threats or in need of fixing, set the stage for this complete withdrawal because once men took those messages to heart and acted on them by stepping away entirely, the dynamic changed permanently. And now, the lashing out that follows is a response to the sudden absence of options that were taken for granted. And as the cost of living crisis deepens, with more people feeling the pinch of higher prices and tighter budgets, the divide in experiences grows sharper, with men maintaining stability through self focus and women confronting the practical limits of going it alone in an environment where government support is contracting rather than expanding. Considering the trajectory ahead, it starts to feel inevitable that these personal choices will reshape larger societal patterns, including how cities function and how services are distributed. Because when millions of men opt out of traditional family roles, the demand for certain kinds of housing and community resources shifts. And this leaves more women handling solo households in markets where rents have outpaced wages, creating situations where financial strain turns into housing instability and the government reforms to social programs add another layer by insisting on work or education requirements that many single mothers find difficult to balance with other responsibilities after years of different arrangements. And men who have walked away are not part of that scramble because they have streamlined their lives around low cost routines that include video games for mental engagement and rest for physical recovery. And this approach keeps them ahead of the curve as the broader economy shows warning signs of deeper trouble with inflation trends and debt indicators pointing toward challenges that could exceed past downturns. And the sobering part is that women are now up against the full force of reality without the safety nets of family or partners that previous generations could lean on. And the men remain unmoved because they have learned that engaging in debates or rescue attempts only leads back to the same exhaustion. And so they stay committed to their path of peace and self reliance, which has proven resilient through the changes. The contrast in daily life that emerges from this movement is striking because while men settle into rhythms of rest and focused activities that feel rewarding on their own terms, women are often left managing every detail of survival, from budgeting tight paychecks to handling all household tasks without the help that used to come from male friends or partners. And this reality hits hardest in the context of rising food costs and housing pressures that force tough trade offs. And the government being limited in its capacity to provide broader relief means the burden falls more heavily on individuals who lack those traditional support structures. And men who have chosen solitude understand this dynamic from their own past experiences. And that is why they do not rush to re enter roles that drain them without reciprocity. Instead, they invest in the quiet satisfaction of lives that serve them directly. And the wake up call here is that the independence promoted for so long has revealed its practical boundaries in an economy that rewards shared responsibilities and punishes isolation. And as the trends continue, the gap in stability will only widen, with men positioned to weather the coming storms through deliberate withdrawal and women navigating increasing difficulties without the buffers they once relied upon. Extending this line of observation further, it becomes evident that the cultural conversation is shifting in subtle ways as more people notice the absence of men in certain social spaces. And the dating scene continues to reflect that withdrawal, with fewer initiations and more women expressing confusion about why the old patterns have broken down. And the straightforward truth is that men have grown informed about the one sided nature of many interactions, and they have decided that their own survival and peace matter more than continuing to play supporting roles that offer little in return. And video games and rest become central to that new balance, offering outlets for competition and recovery that align with their priorities in a high pressure economic climate. And for women, the situation is compounded by the cost of living crisis, which shows no signs of easing, with rents and groceries taking larger bites out of incomes and the government cuts to programs, creating additional hurdles that require more personal effort at a time when resources are already stretched thin. And this leaves many in positions where the desperation builds, but the men stay focused on their own path because they have seen the futility of arguments based on feelings rather than mutual facts. And the peace they have secured feels like the only logical outcome after years of imbalance. The broader implications for future generations start to come into focus when you consider how these choices will influence everything from education systems to workforce participation, because with fewer men committing to family life under current conditions, the population growth slows and communities adapt to smaller household sizes, which in turn affects everything from school enrollments to housing demand. And women who are now raising children without the traditional partnership are facing the full weight of that responsibility in an environment where economic pressures make every expense feel significant. And the government reforms demand more self sufficiency, which adds to the load for single mothers who were not necessarily prepared for the shift after relying on different kinds of support. And men who have walked away are not part of that equation because they have opted for lives that do not involve those responsibilities. And instead, they find fulfillment in routines centered on rest and personal activities that keep them steady. And this contrast serves as a powerful reminder that the decisions made today shape the landscape tomorrow. And the sobering reality is that the walkaway has created a new normal where men prioritize their own well being and women confront the practical outcomes of the independence they championed. In a world where support systems are evolving and sometimes contracting under budget realities. As the economic indicators continue to flash warning signs, the divide in how different groups experience the cost of living crisis becomes impossible to overlook, because men who have streamlined their lives around self reliance are able to absorb price increases in food and housing with less strain, while women without that buffer often find themselves making harder choices between essentials, and the government being unable to fully step in with expanded assistance means the pressure builds for those who lack personal networks, and the men stay committed to their path because they have already navigated the transition and found peace in solitude through activities like video games that provide engagement without the drain of unbalanced relationships. And this approach has proven effective as the broader society grapples with changes that no one fully anticipated when the calls for separation first began. And the raw truth is that interdependence was undervalued, and the consequences are now playing out in real time, with women facing the harshness of reality without the protection or assistance they once had, and men holding firm to the contentment they have built through deliberate distance. The narrative that keeps emerging is one of adaptation and consequence, where men have responded to the messages of the past by creating lives that work for them in the present, and the future looks different because of it, with lower expectations around traditional roles and a greater emphasis on personal stability in the face of rising costs and shifting social structures. And women are adjusting to this new landscape in ways that highlight the limits of solo navigation when economic pressures mount and support programs tighten, and the desperation that surfaces is understandable. But it does not change the fact that the withdrawal was complete and based on clear observations of how dynamics operated. And as the cost of living crisis persists, the choices men made to focus on their own peace stand as a model of resilience that others may eventually recognize as the smarter path in uncertain times. And the government limitations only reinforce the importance of self reliance, because the era of unlimited assistance is fading, and individuals are left to build their own buffers through careful living and focused routines. This entire movement underscores a fundamental truth about human nature and societal design that was overlooked for too long, because when you remove the balance that came from mutual support, the system starts to strain under its own weight, and men who have walked away have found a way to operate outside that strain by keeping their resources and energy close and investing them in ways that deliver returns, like the satisfaction from video games or the restoration from rest. And this leaves women, in many cases, handling the full load of daily survival without the help that used to come from partners or male friends. And the economic reality of higher prices and tighter budgets makes that load even heavier, while government reforms add requirements that demand more from individuals already stretched thin. And the sobering wake up call is that the independence celebrated in past decades has revealed its practical cost in a world where nature and history both point toward the value of partnership. And now, with those partnerships diminished, the outcomes are showing in the daily lives of millions who are learning to navigate without the safety nets that once existed. And men remain content in their solitude because they have experienced the alternative and chosen the path that preserves their well being. The patterns that defined earlier interactions have been broken and replaced with a new reality where men no longer default to providing or supporting without reciprocity. And this shift has allowed them to build stability on their own terms in an economy that rewards careful resource management. And the women who are now facing the other side are dealing with the absence of those defaults in ways that expose vulnerabilities during times of rising cost and reduced assistance. And the government being limited in its role means the burden falls more directly on personal networks that have been distanced. And this creates a situation where the frustration grows, but the men stay focused on their routines of peace and self focus because they have no interest in returning to cycles that left them depleted. And the raw truth is that this change is reshaping society from the ground up, with long term effects that will influence everything from family formation to economic participation. And the wake up call is that actions taken years ago have led to consequences that are now unfolding in full view for anyone paying attention to the shifts. Continuing this exploration, it is worth noting how the quiet nature of the withdrawal has made it so effective, because there is no dramatic confrontation or ongoing debate, just a steady movement toward lives that prioritize personal peace. And men are discovering that video games and rest provide a balance that feels right after the exhaustion of previous dynamics, and this approach keeps them resilient as the cost of living crisis continues with its impact on housing and food prices, forcing everyone to make adjustments, but hitting hardest those without shared resources. And for women, the situation often involves managing solo in environments where government programs have become more demanding and less automatic, leaving many single mothers in particular to balance work requirements with family needs in ways that stretch their capacity. And the men who have stepped away are not part of that equation because they have chosen paths that do not involve those responsibilities. And instead, they invest in the simplicity that brings contentment. And this contrast highlights the effectiveness of their decision in a time when broader economic pressures are testing the limits of individual resilience. The future that is taking shape is one where self reliance becomes the dominant strategy for those who have adapted early, and men who walked away are already living that strategy with routines built around activities that sustain them without external demands. And the women navigating the changes are learning the value of that approach the hard way as costs rise and support structures evolve. And the government being unable to provide the same level of cushion means the importance of personal networks is reemerging, but many of those networks have been altered by the withdrawal, and this leaves gaps that are felt in daily life. And the sobering reality is that the movement has created a new baseline where men prioritize their own survival and peace. And the consequences of that choice are playing out across society in ways that no one can reverse with words alone. And as the trends continue, the divide will likely deepen, with those who embrace solitude positioned to handle uncertainty better than those who remained reliant on dynamics that have since dissolved. This brings us to a point where the authoritative picture is unmistakable because the walkaway was not a temporary reaction, but a lasting realignment based on lived experience and observation. And men have found genuine value in the peace of their own space through video games that engage the mind and rest that restores the body. And this has allowed them to face the economic challenges with a level of calm that comes from not carrying unnecessary loads. And women on the other side are confronting the full implications of independence in a high cost environment where government assistance is more conditional and personal effort is required more than ever. And the raw truth is that the earlier messages encouraging separation have led to outcomes that reveal the importance of balance. And now, with that balance disrupted, the adjustments are happening unevenly, leaving some groups better prepared for the future than others. And the wake up call is that these changes are here to stay. And the choices individuals make in response will determine how they navigate the road ahead as the cost of living crisis and broader economic pressures continue to unfold. The depth of this transformation becomes even clearer when you consider the way men have redirected their energy away from external expectations and toward internal fulfillment, and they are no longer willing to be the default solution for every practical or emotional need because they have experienced how that role leads to burnout without mutual benefit. And instead, they build days around rest and hobbies that actually replenish them. And video games stand out as a perfect example of controlled engagement that rewards effort directly and provides a sense of progress that many real world interactions failed to deliver. And this shift has given them a foundation of stability that feels solid as inflation and housing costs create daily hurdles for others and for women. The absence of that default support means handling every aspect of life solo in ways that amplify the stress of rising expenses and the government reforms to social programs. Add another dimension by insisting on training or employment that many were not set up to pursue after different circumstances. And this creates a cycle of increasing pressure where the desperation surfaces, but the men remain disengaged because they have learned the limits of engagement and chosen the path of peace instead. The societal adjustments that follow from this movement are profound because they touch on everything from how people form connections to how resources are distributed. And men who have opted for solitude are living examples of self contained stability in a time when economic conditions make interdependence more valuable yet harder to achieve. And women who are now managing without the previous networks are discovering the practical boundaries of independence as costs climb and assistance becomes more limited. And the sobering truth is that the government cannot fully replace the role that personal relationships once played. And with those relationships diminished, the gaps are felt more acutely. And the men who walked away have no intention of filling them because they have found a better way through deliberate focus on their own well being. And this reality serves as the ultimate wake up call for anyone observing the shifts because it shows that when half the population steps back, the entire picture changes in ways that cannot be undone. And the future will belong to those who adapt to the new normal with clear eyes and practical strategies. As the conversation around these changes continues to evolve, it is important to recognize that the men involved are not acting out of anger, but out of a clear headed assessment of what works for their long term peace. And they have embraced routines that include video games for mental stimulation and rest for physical renewal, because those choices deliver consistent returns without the unpredictability of past dynamics. And this has positioned them well as the cost of living crisis persists with its grip on daily budgets, and the women facing the other side are often left to navigate increasing financial strain without the help that used to come from male involvement. And the government being stretched means the support systems are evolving toward greater individual responsibility, which leaves many in challenging spots. And the raw truth is that the walk away has created a landscape where self reliance is the key to stability. And men have already made that transition, while others are still coming to terms with the reality of going it alone in an unforgiving economic climate. The momentum of this shift shows no signs of slowing because each new wave of economic pressure only reinforces the wisdom of the choice men made to prioritize their own survival and peace. And they are building lives that do not depend on re entering unbalanced cycles. And the video games and rest that form the core of their routines provide a sustainable balance that feels authentic after years of different experiences. And for women, the situation involves adapting to a world where the old support structures have faded and the cost of living crisis makes every decision more critical, with government programs offering less automatic relief and more requirements for participation. And this leaves many dealing with the full weight of independence in ways that highlight the value of the partnerships that were once common. And the sobering wake up call is that the consequences of past messages are now fully visible, and the men who listened and acted are living the outcomes while the broader society adjusts to the new reality that has emerged from those choices. This ongoing realignment points toward a future where personal agency and self focus become the dominant themes for those who have embraced the change. And men who walked away are already operating from that foundation with routines that serve them directly and deliver the peace they sought. And the women navigating the shifts are learning to build similar resilience, but often starting from a place of greater strain due to the absence of previous networks and the economic pressures that continue to mount. And the government limitations on assistance only emphasize the importance of individual preparation. And the raw truth is that the movement has reshaped the social landscape in lasting ways. And the wake up call is that these changes demand clear thinking and practical adaptation from everyone involved as the trends continue to unfold. And the cost of living crisis tests the limits of how society functions without the balance that once defined it. And if you have stuck with this discussion all the way through and made it to the very end, then you are officially part of the 2 hour gang. And that means you have sat through the full, unfiltered breakdown of how millions of men have listened to the long standing calls for them to step back and have done exactly that, finding genuine peace in their own space while the broader economic pressures keep tightening around everyone else. And it is sobering to realize that this quiet movement has reshaped daily life in ways that no policy or demand can undo. Because the cost of living crisis, with its climbing rents and food prices, has left women who once relied on that support now facing the full weight of independence without the networks that used to make survival feel manageable, and the government programs that were supposed to fill the gap have tightened their rules, requiring more work and training, which catches many single mothers off guard after years of different arrangements. Yet the men who walked away remain steady in their routines of rest and simple activities that keep them grounded without the exhaustion of one sided dynamics. And that is the raw truth of where things stand after decades of messaging that encourage separation without fully accounting for how interconnected those roles truly were. So if you're enjoying these angry guy videos and want to show some real support, you can buy me a Red Bull with a one-time gift or through a monthly pledge by using the link in the description of the video, because that helps keep the honest conversations coming without any fluff or filler. And now that we have laid out the full picture, I want to hear straight from you what you think about everything we have covered here, whether you agree with the way these shifts are playing out or see different angles on how the economic realities and the choices men have made are affecting society at large. Because the only way we get closer to understanding this sobering wake up call is by sharing real thoughts in the comments. So drop your honest take on what stood out most and if it lines up with what you are seeing in your own life or around you. Because that kind of open exchange keeps the discussion real and grounded in the straightforward facts rather than recycled narratives. Like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.